Ghislaine Maxwell found guilty, but judge orders all details on Epstein networks to be sealed. In summary, it's worse than all the conspiracy theories. Ghislaine Maxwell found guilty on 5 of 6 counts, but the court is ordering Epstein's documents sealed. We need to know the names and everyone involved so that they too can be brought to justice. Are you paying attention yet? The DOJ and Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers have made a deal that her little black book of contacts will never be made public. Welcome to another episode of me Googling things for you. Today I want to talk about some of the rumors that have followed the Ghislaine Maxwell trial after she was found guilty in December of 2021. Following the verdict, a lot of right-wing leaning pundits and journalists tweeted that the documents were being sealed. According to them, the information about Epstein's network that was in Ghislaine Maxwell's address books and other records was going to be sealed so that the public could never know about the perverts that they had close association with that hadn't yet come to light. If you Google Ghislaine Maxwell records sealed, something like that, you'll probably find an article like the one I found on Politifact. According to their evaluation, there's nothing to this idea that the records have been sealed. They concluded, the judge did not order all of the evidence and proof sealed, and most of it was published by media outlets during the trial, including information about Epstein and other high-profile people. We rate this claim false. Having looked into it, I think it's interesting because there are really two pieces of evidence that people are talking about when they talk about the sealed records. And I think that people get confused about what was sealed and what's already publicly available. The first piece of evidence that people are talking about is an exhibit that's Ghislaine's contact address book, also known as the Little Black Book. This book has close to 2,000 contacts, and that's the piece of evidence that Politifact is talking about. And they're right. The Little Black Book was published online first by Gawker in 2015. And while the phone numbers and addresses were redacted in that version, you can find, if you're willing to go into the darker corners of the internet, you could find all of the names that were in that contact book already. It's kind of confusing because when you read about the trial, you read about how the judge had certain portions of the Little Black Book redacted or sealed, but I don't know what the point of that was because if you know where to look, you can find all of the information in that book. In addition to portions of the Little Black Book, there was a ton of unsealed evidence in the most recent Ghislaine Maxwell trial. There are new photos of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell together that prominently feature Jeffrey Epstein's feet. Sorry about that. I'm going to insert several of those. We know from interviews with Jeffrey Epstein's staff that members of his staff were required to have copies of this address book. So there have been copies of this book with multiple people for years, and it's been online at least since 2015. The version used in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, I believe, comes to us from Alfredo Rodriguez, who was Jeffrey Epstein's house manager from 2004 to 2005. He was convicted and sentenced to 18 months in prison in 2010 after he tried to sell the Little Black Book for $50,000 to Brad Edwards, who was a lawyer representing the cavalcade of women who were accusing Jeffrey Epstein of sex trafficking and abuse. So when you look at a tweet like this one from Jack Posobiec, where he says, "Are you paying attention yet? The DOJ and Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers have made a deal that her Little Black Book of contacts will never be made public." That's obviously ridiculous. Like, Jack, Google it, babe. It's right there. It's really not hard to find. I'm not a journalist. I think that he purports to be some kind of journalist. And if so, do something else. This is not for you. But there is evidence from a Ghislaine Maxwell trial that hasn't been made public. And that's actually from the 2015 civil trial between Ghislaine Maxwell and Virginia Giuffre. If you know anything about Jeffrey Epstein, you know that Virginia Giuffre is one of his main accusers. She kind of led the charge in the criminal case against him. She filed a defamation case against Ghislaine Maxwell in 2015 after Ghislaine Maxwell said that Giuffre was lying about her sexual assault, sexual abuse allegations. While Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal trial was going on, she was fighting to keep those names sealed. But since she lost her case and her appeal for a new trial has been denied, in January 2022, Ghislaine's lawyers announced that they would no longer be arguing to keep those names sealed. Now it's up to federal judge Loretta Preska to decide if the public will get to know the identities of non-party does 17, 53, 54, 55, 73, 93, and 151. Who are you, you sons of bitches? There is, I think, a strong impulse in more left-leaning media outlets to dismiss conspiracy theories. But it's not really a conspiracy theory, and while a lot of the people who are tweeting, they're hiding evidence, we need to know, show us the information, you're all pedophiles, every judge is a pedophile. Not correct. But there is something to this idea that, like, why is this information being sealed? What possible reason could there be? So...
You.
I think that so really works here.
Sometimes it does.
So the question becomes, why would those names be kept from the public? One reason that's been brought up by Giuffre's lawyers is generalized aversion to embarrassment. Her lawyers stated, generalized aversion to embarrassment and negativity that may come from being associated with Epstein and Maxwell is not enough to warrant continued sealing of information. But why do courts seal records? I looked into this a little bit for the sake of this video, and it's actually a mess. There aren't a lot of federal guidelines as to what gets sealed versus what doesn't. I found an article called Court Transparency and the First Amendment by David Ardea. He's an assistant professor of law at the University of North Carolina School of Law. In courts across the country, secrecy is increasingly the norm. Indeed, the extent of secrecy in American courts is astonishing, especially given the assumption by many that the First Amendment guarantees a right of public access to the courts. In reality, the United States Supreme Court has explicitly held only that there is a First Amendment right of public access to criminal trials and pre-trial proceedings. The court has never addressed the question of whether there is a constitutional right of access to civil proceedings or to court records. My research assistant also found this court order in which a judge agrees that certain portions of documents should be redacted. Their reasoning was that their disclosure would serve only to cater to a craving for that which is sensational and impure. Evidently, the Constitution does not protect our rights to those cravings. Amend the Constitution. I talked to my dad briefly about this because he's a lawyer, and he said a lot of the times court will seal records if it involves a minor or the internal workings of a business, and that makes sense. Like, there are some things that obviously it's nobody's business, it's not really in the public's best interest to know about it, but it's definitely in the public's best interest to know the names of people who Virginia Giuffre wants the world to know about. So I assume she has reason to believe that they're somehow involved in sex trafficking. I don't know. It seems like it is in the public's best interest to know. And that is suspicious as to why that's been kept from us. Wouldn't you agree?
I also think it's funny that Prince Andrew has just been totally forgotten because he stepped down. Like, well, it's okay if he did it because he's not royal anymore.
He hasn't been forgotten. Oh, by the way, he's suspected to be one of the, I'm glad you brought up Prince Andrew.
Yeah, he's on the list.
He's suspected to be one of the anonymous John Does. Apparently, 2 of those John Does have said that they don't care if their names are publicized. Like, I guess they're just that rich. They're like, sure, I have nothing to hide.
Yeah.
I think sex trafficking is cool, and that's my lifestyle, and everyone can get used to it. The other 6 are like, ooh, please don't. I found a really interesting article in Mother Jones called I Called Everyone in Jeffrey Epstein's Little Black Book, where the reporter, Leland Nally, found one of those copies that I mentioned before that had unredacted phone numbers, and he went ahead and just gave them all a ring. And he discovered that, of course, there are numbers of people like Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew, but for every Jordanian princess, there are also 3 reflexologists from Boca. A lot of the people are just normal, working people who have nothing to do, probably, I mean, who knows, but probably have nothing to do with sex trafficking. The thing about Jeffrey Epstein is if you look into how he operated and how he moved through the world, a lot of it depended on him just knowing a lot of people. I'm sure that he operated on the basis of, who knows who could be useful to me at some point. I'm such a pervert and I'm such a social climber, and you just never know. So I think it was in his best nefarious, gross interest to just know a lot of people and have a lot of connections. So the Little Black Book, I think a lot of these tweets characterize as being some kind of linchpin to the world of billionaire pedophiles, and that is just not the case. If there is a conspiracy, it's about these 8 John Does whose names haven't been released yet. Where are those John Does? Why don't we know their names? We probably should know their names. And in conclusion, those 8 John Does should be shaking in their shoes. Let's hope those names come to light.
Let's hope it's not somebody we like
And let's hope
Jon
it's not
Stewart or somebody.
Yeah, hold your loved ones tight and whisper in their ears if you're one of those John Does. We're coming for you. TikTok.